Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Kansas City blues musician and radio host Jason Vivone. We caught up with him on May 11th, 2020 to have a very frank talk about this strange COVID-19 quarantine world. He is the leader of Kansas City's award-winning band, Billy Bats, and the host of the Boogie Bridge on KKFI 90.1 FM. Originally from Cape Girardeau, Missouri, he has called Kansas City home for quite some time, and he's made this place a much brighter place. It was a great discussion. Enjoy.
Hey, Jason.
Hi.
What's going on, man?
Pretty good. What's new with you?
Just trying to survive this surreal storm we're all in.
I just don't know what we're going to look like after this stuff. Or if there's going to be an after this stuff. Is there a new start-stop, to our world with this? I just don't know.
That's the thing about it. We're shrouded in ambiguity. Everything changes all the time. There's no real way of saying, well, yeah, this is what's going to happen. And then live venues, you got this 10-10-10 thing, and I know clubs need to start getting something going, but, if you can only have 10 people in, is that going to keep them afloat? And what are the performers going to think about that? It's like,
I think it's a dive into rocky water. I just knowing the overhead of what a restaurant has to cover and insurance, and we're still finding more things out. We don't know what the last page of the book is like. I'm afraid this thing's gonna become airborne, or parts of it is, or the successor is. What's live performance going to be like?
It's insane. It really is.
And it's all going to take a while to redefine. And it's like the way we look at the 1930s, and we're like, oh, Social Security, what a great idea. And that's just, we just don't have the benefit of being on the other side of this. And the rest of the world's in it too. It's not like, every community's affected in one way or the other. And, I just don't know. But yeah, you've hit the nail on the head about performing and all of that. I found that a lot of the folks in the blues community, have kind of skewed away from Facebook, except for telling people that, hey, here are gigs. But to use it as like a video source to perform that way, has been kind of frustrated for some of these folks. And yeah, the money's not the same. You've got, certain technological challenges that maybe you hadn't faced before, but that just may be where we are.
I think that's the part of this that's the scariest, is that we just have no idea when the end is in sight. It's like in 2 months, everything that we've been told as human beings to do, which is to shake hands, look people in the eyes, go out and explore the world, and do everything, has been completely revoked. And then on top of that,
that's well said. Yeah.
And then on top of that, we have no timeline. Which for at least a child, you got to give him some kind of timeline to say, hey, this is when things are going to get back. I don't even want to go to certain places to realize how bad this is. I mean, I mean, it's like Spotify is starting to become more of a joke than it is anything else. When they're like, oh yeah, we're putting money aside. It's like, okay, well, where was all that money before? And there's so many things.
We always laugh when we get our return from Spotify, and it's like, hey, look, 1/10 of a penny.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just going to be worse.
Uh-huh.
And, my other background was in live theater. So I have no idea what those folks are going to do. It's the same question as musicians. And then what do you do? Do you really separate an audience 6 feet between everybody? And then do the performers have to sign an insurance waiver that says, I'm this close to another performer?
And then, lawyers could have a field day if there's liability, and all these companies already aren't making money, so they're going to have to probably do new HVAC things, temperature readings.
Nobody's talking about insurance companies or health insurance or, what is that going to look like? It's just every facet we can name is going to have an explosion,
Uh-huh. Yep. It's, I look back and talk to musicians, and I even think back to like March 12th to 13th, and I'm like, wow, what a glorified time in our history, because at least at that point we could say nothing had changed and we were just living our lives. But I guess that's my first question to you. When did you start seeing dominoes fall? When did all of this start becoming like, wow, it's all going down?
I mean, we talked about it, and this is maybe a little more lighthearted than I expected to get, but maybe it's due. Musicians love end of the world stories. Musicians love apocalyptic stories, because they're dramatists essentially. And what's more dramatic, and what's been in our culture since you and I, little kids with the Omega Man, and.
Right,
the
you're right.
sci-fi we grew up with, Sundar the Barbarian, and everything is the end of the world and there's a start over. And then somewhere with the Millennium and the Walking Dead and Y2K, somewhere there came like this cultural hunger for let's tear it all down. What the hell are things going to be like? Let's, but more specifically, there are... when the NBA said, yeah, we're closing up, then we're like, it's here. The NBA doesn't shut down. That was chilling. And I've got chill bumps on my arms telling you that right now.
Yeah. Because
with the amount of money that they have, with the number of folks employed, with just everybody that works for each venue, the number of tickets, the number of season tickets, if they're shutting down, and it's not like, well, we'll just play tonight. No, it's whatever it was, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, we're shutting down. That's done.
Yep.
Yeah. It's like, all right, we're in trouble, gang. That's
yeah, you're right. I remember when that happened, when it started, they were like, well, Major League Baseball will start on, April 8th. We'll get back to it. And then I read on Twitter, umpire looked back at somebody in the crowd and said, we'll see you guys in June. And when I heard that, I was like, wait, hold on a second now. Are you serious? And then people were like, well, how can that be? Well, this was back in mid-March. We didn't know anything. But you're right. When all these leagues started saying it's over with, then it was like, wait, hold on now. There's something's wrong.
And I like history, I like learning, but there's nothing out there on the 1918 pandemic. I've never seen it in the movie. There's 2 songs I know of with it, and I had to look for them. There's never been some Oscar movie with, I remember one documentary as a kid. The information just hasn't been out there, and now that everybody has a camera and everybody has a blog and everybody has a Facebook, this will be documented at least for future folks. But I was trying to look into old texts and old interviews to just see what were the musicians doing at that time? What was happening? Did they close up the bars? Did they close up? And there's still no definitive, text. Things weren't. We didn't have a Surgeon General, We didn't have a national dialogue then like we do now. So I don't know. I was looking to history a lot for just, hey, what happened in New Orleans during this time? What happened in New York? What happened to all these great music meccas then? Is there any insight that they had that can fill us in now? And frankly, I'm not finding nothing.
And I got to tell you, I've been talking to a lot of musicians, and it's been very illuminating to hear all of these different perspectives on things. And, there's just, someone the other day was saying, even during Prohibition, Kansas City had jazz. Like, someone was talking about that. And I was like, wow, you're right. Like, there hasn't been a time in this town's history that jazz was just silenced, and let alone everything else that's silenced. And what I got to start thinking... It is, but the one thing that I'm reassured by, and I know I specifically focus more on jazz, but it's also blues, and it's also these arts that I consider high arts, and that I also consider an art that people get into not for the money. So at the end of the day, you know, there's going to be a resurgence out of these great adversities. We had the birth of bebop. We had idioms that were born, and they were born not out of commercialism. Verve and Bruno weren't like, hey, guys, you guys need a woodshed to get to this point. These cats felt it in their soul because they were stirred enough by the humanity that was getting kicked around within them. So that's what I see partially as a part of all of this, with cats like you and all these other musicians that are out here like, what are we doing? What's going on? Perhaps there's a resurgence and there's a hope for the fact that you're in it for the art, solely because of the art.
Yeah, and you know, you talk to musicians, so there are hacks out there. There are people who just play just because they can play and they're good at it, and you know, they get a reward there and they pay their bills and whatever. And I do wonder what will happen to those people. I think we do have a personal revolution coming as far as all artists, not just musicians and songwriters, but visual artists, video artists, I think is going to be more of a dominant thing in our culture as well. And I think there's going to be a lot of crossover. You know, I think there's going to be a lot of Renaissance people. People are doing things with music and with video. I think theater is going to change again. You know, I imagine that people could just go to certain neighborhoods and just perform just in the middle of the street. And people could look out their windows and see performers out there. Yeah, we're getting back to raw. We're getting back to why people were invested, you know, probably picked up an instrument to begin with. I don't know. It makes me think of the folk era where people were getting their news and information from songs, social criticism from songs. I think that stuff's going to be there too. We also have this great, you know, once again, the technology of the day. I don't know where we'd be, man, if we didn't have it. You know, and we'd come from a culture, and my grandmother was part of this, that after you worked on the farm, you played an instrument all night. You sat and you sang your piano and guitar with your family, you know, then you shut everything down at dark. And are we going to return to that? Are we going to work at our home cubicle during the day and then create our individual art at night? Is this the way that art comes back to all of humanity and everybody's an artist again? I don't know.
You know, when this started, I was telling my wife, I really, really believe there's a lot of musicians that have been just running, tour album, making money, have this house weathering in the hills of Los Angeles, don't see family, and now they get to do this. And I talked to one jazz musician specifically that's doing really well and has done well, and he sounded so relaxed, so happy, said, I don't miss any of this. There's been a handful between around the world even that have just sounded like they may not come back. And I've been wondering that, just like you said. I think there's going to be if they don't have to worry about money and they get to reconnect with their families and the record labels aren't all over them and they can't tour, I mean, are you kidding? It's like they got a permanent vacation and a portal into a world that they've never seen before. It's like, why would I leave paradise? Like, here's heaven, all right? You get to stay on earth and be in heaven. Do you want to go back to this thing possibly called travel, busy all the time hell? So there you go.
Well, and let me yes and you and say that yes, and touring was dying anyway. Yes, and the classic definition of what a record label is and does was dying anyway. And is this just the stake of the heart? You know, is this the way, okay, now we know it's over. Now it's time to redefine things and, you know, see what springs up in its place. I also think you're talking about the musicians not coming back. Yeah, some folks I know and are very, you know, they're older. They're happy with the idea that, you know, hey, I had a good run. You know, and I'm not there, but I admire that. I think this is really interesting too, and just we've been talking about this around the house. for as many songwriters as we know, everybody's working on something, but they don't know. Nothing has really just blown full from their head. You know, nothing. Yeah, nothing is like shot out of their brain like the God is fully formed. People aren't sure how to write about this stuff yet. You know, we're still in the day-to-day of it. I think that's interesting. Because what do you say? And then is your song out of date with the news conference the next day? I don't know.
Yeah,
I just don't know.
I don't know that any of us know. I've never been in a situation as a person interviewing people where I've heard so many levels of I'm just not sure. Like, there was always such surety. And the thing that I've always wondered, and I've always asked, especially with jazz, is like, how healthy is jazz? I know now. I know definitively the amount of shows, traveling, and concerts and festivals that have been canceled by one person.
Yeah,
it's staggering.
Oh.
You know, and then you multiply that by just New York or just the West Coast or just the Midwest, and it's like, it's unreal. It was doing unbelievably well. I mean, Kansas City was going through a renaissance. I mean, bona fide. Yeah. What I would like to do right now with you is kind of talk to you about this new world that we're in, the COVID-19 world, and then at another point we'll kind of get into a different part of your history. I mean, we can pull pieces of history in, but I think it's interesting. I'm fascinated with your perspective on this new world that we're in, and it is. It's like you said, there's a part of me that's been, you know, when this all happened, I literally couldn't listen to radio or music for a few days. I was just kind of like, the sirens of Titan were going through my skull, and I just couldn't really focus. And then I thought, what would be one of the best things that I could do in every possible way, from a cathartic, artistic, creative standpoint, and it's to reach out to all the artists and to find a way to connect during one of the very rare moments that we're going to probably ever have on this planet. You know, one of the things that I realized out of this is that radio is probably one of the safest mediums that we can get involved with. I mean, there's no transfer of anything. It's waves coming through a speaker. It's all of these things. Right. And you're in this world of radio, and I kind of opened Pandora's box to a certain degree. So talk to me a little bit about what you're doing with the Boogie Bridge, kind of what you see happening with radio, that kind of realm.
We've been deemed essential personnel, and that's great. So it means we get to keep on broadcasting and use the airwaves for getting information about the virus and about the community, but also we get to, supply the sinew that holds everything together, and that's the music. That's the stuff that bonded a lot of folks in this community to begin with. So I've got a couple family members that are here with me who are pretty susceptible to what COVID could do, some pulmonary issues and things. So I've been able to figure out how to edit old shows, and then I send them over to our engineer, and then he puts them in. So I haven't done a live show since mid-March. I'm happy because I've never rebroadcast a show before. You know, the 7 years of doing it, I've been so proud of some shows, but we've never edited them and re-aired them. It was always something I was going to do one of these days. I'm happy for that because, you put 40 hours of work in a show and then it's over at 6 o'clock that night. So I'm happy we get to do that and kind of just bring some dialogue back up with some of the different artists we've played. And I've been really going back to the special features, the 3-hour features we did on Dave Bartholomew was coming up this week, and last week was Chuck Berry and James Cotton, and so that feels really good to bring those shows back and to have those dialogue about those artists again. And there's something kind of sweet about it, about where we are now, and then the references to 3 years ago. When I say, oh wow, 2017, we've lost so many artists. And now I think, gosh, how many have we just lost in April? So, but then again, it's bittersweet. I'm glad I don't have to go in, but we're going to have to break down and figure out how to do with our current situation new shows, because I've I've had material pulled for a Little Richard 3-hour special for a long time, featuring Richard and then Escarito. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and Billy Wright and Brother Joe May and all these folks who, Ruth Brown, all these folks who influenced Richard. And then some crazy tracks of his. Leaning into the technology more, I've been trying to build some Spotify pages until I can do a full curated, scripted Boogie Bridge for Little Richard and for some of these artists who've passed on. Young Jesse passed away. That guy was a coaster, and he had his own recording career. His brother is Otis Day of Otis Day and the Knights. Nobody remembers Young Jesse. And he was that first class rock and roll guy. And just imagine, when he died and his name came up, more people probably saw his name that day than ever saw him live. The same thing with Little Richard. There's this new cyber afterlife that these artists are getting. And I feel like we've, at the Boogie Bridge, has kind of been a part of that. Radio stations are going through a change now because as safe as it is for the listener, you're sharing a microphone with other people. And we've had jocks at our station at KKFI who have had COVID. And trying to keep things clean and uniformly clean, you're sharing a microphone with somebody. You're sharing a chair with somebody. You're pushing all the same buttons. You have the same workspace and the same work console. And that's been a real challenge. So that's one reason why I've been working remotely from home. And thank God the technology allows that.
I guess that's another part of this that I wanted to kind of bring up, that I've been listening to radio and I've been hearing kind of some things that have been going on, but I just haven't really heard a lot of talking about the COVID thing. I mean, it's kind of brought up here and there. What my approach personally has been, I'm going head on with it. Lee Konitz, Bootsy Barnes, Ellis Marsalis, all these cats, and really talking about it. I've been trying to reach out to you and other artists here in town. I think it's really good in a very therapeutic, cathartic way for us to kind of talk about this right now. And I guess
absolutely,
it's almost as though I was talking to somebody that was talking about how when we get out of this, it's like we all battled a disease. We're all going to be going through a death. And I think that's kind of a part of what's going on right now. I think there's certain people and certain psyches that can't take it. It's too much. And then maybe there's others that want to, but for Little Richard, for what you do and the impact he had, that's the Willy Wonka ticket right there. I mean, he has to be observed during this very trying time. So what is your take on that?
Well, and just Richard specifically brings up a lot of issues that we're dealing with the country with. Here was a black man playing to white kids who was gay, and wrestling with his own very conservative religious views for all of his life, and he influenced everybody. And he sang all these randy, racy, sexually explicit songs that he had to sweeten up, and then it made goofy. I met Pat Boone once in Branson. I was a guitar player in Branson, and I did all that James Burton chicken picking stuff, and Pat Boone was down there and working at the Will Rogers Follies. And I told my friend, it's like, I have a joke I want to tell Pat Boone. Would that be okay? My friend was his lighting designer, and he's like, yeah, Pat will be cool with whatever you say. I'm like, I mean, I'm not walking into something here. He goes, no, tell your joke to him. It was this long line of people, and I was there at the end. I said, Pat, Little Richard called, and he's pissed off because he says he played Will Rogers first. And it's not much of a joke, but Pat laughed and slapped me on the back, and then he said, are you really friends with Little Richard? And I'm like, then suddenly I felt like I was in trouble, I was embarrassed. I'm like, no, I've never met him. And he's like, he and I laugh together and we pray together, and he will love your joke. And then I was embarrassed a second time about it, number one, that he was so kind and that he thought it was funny, and then he was going to tell Little Richard. I'm like, oh my God, I hope he never told Little Richard that joke.
Yeah.
But no, you know, I was a big Chuck Berry fan, and, you know, guitar player and Missouri and everything, but the lament for Little Richard is stronger than for Chuck. And is that because of where we are right now with COVID? Is it because of where we are socially, that there's a little more insecurity with groups who are finding their sexual identity and groups of conservative religious? I mean, Little Richard covered a lot of viewpoints in just one body. But no, I've found like through the show, having these 3-hour specials on these things is cathartic for me, and I feel like it's kind of my duty to kind of educate folks when I can, or to learn myself and say, oh, here Escarita is the guy, and Richard learned that from him. I don't know. Have I talked you out on Little Richard?
No.
Okay, now I will tell you this. I've been saying this for a long time, and I'm going to give it to you so it'll be in print. All right, all these Batman movies for years, right? You and I grew up with Cesar Romero, right? And there was Jack Nicholson and Heath Ledger, and all these guys played the Joker in all these Batman movies. Little Richard would have been the best Joker.
Yeah.
Little Richard would have killed as the Joker.
Yeah.
He would have been funny. He would have been intimidating. He would have been just weird. So I wish that would have happened. Now, I don't know who played Batman against him. Carl Perkins? I don't know. That didn't work.
Right.
And I'm sure he already had the makeup.
Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt. That would have been awesome. Awesome. Oh, man. And that's a great visual now with all of the distractions that are going on in the world.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, you have a unique perspective being a musician and being able to be behind the mic. And I find that to be such a great mix in KKFI with what you do. You got Harshbarger, you have Roger Wilder, you have all these people, and you always bring in such good, fresh perspectives, and you're on stage. So I guess my question is this, is you look at, you know Kansas City well enough from the stage and the microphone. Talk to me a little bit about, and we kind of touched a little bit on this, but a little bit more pointedly, talk to me about recovery. And I ask you this in the vein of coming from what you know of the integrity and fiber and optimism that the Kansas City people have as people, as a populace.
Oh, I'm going to go real dark first.
Sure.
And say that venues are going to die. There are places that we have loved, that have hosted live music for decades, that we've relied upon, and some of them will go away and never be able to come back. There are some musicians who will just say, what the hell, and they're going to be done, and they're not going to come back. So with that scary stuff being said, I think part of recovery for blues and jazz and folk and rock and any kind of live performance right now is going to have to borrow some of the patronage and the support of the non-for-profit umbrellas, you know, the thing that has kept live theater going, and the thing that has kept the ballet and the opera and these things. There's private donors, but then there's also the educative quality of it. I think that's going to have to happen on a major scale to start paying clubs to pay musicians to come back in. I don't know how that will happen. I don't know if there's going to be arts grants from individual cities, but I don't see us coming back without that. I think there's going to be a new appreciation for live performance. I think the first live performances that people are around as somebody who's playing a horn in the same room as they are, I think they'll have no interest in their phone as they see a live human being singing, you know, and producing these tones. We were fighting the phone in January and February for competition. I think when there's going to be a live soul in the room performing this music for them, I think people will ignore their phones again. I think there's going to be a new banner, a new ability, seeing in the live performers who go out there and risk. On a more personal level, the band and I are talking about, okay, what if we're in shape and we can't get booked for a year? What if nobody's more? And then we start to talk about the great jazz tradition of the 20s and 30s of setting up in Swope Park and playing. And then that might be another way that the city or government could help subsidize some of this stuff, is just throwing free concerts and paying for them. I just don't see us coming back without that. It's hard enough to run a restaurant, and already there was a decline in the number of restaurants that were hosting live music. It seemed like used to a club would die and another one would take its place, and that hasn't been the case the last couple of years. Now a club will die and there's no new ones to step up. Yeah, I think somehow the government's going to have to step in, the city government, state government, county, National Endowment for the Arts, and then with the certain limitations. I don't know. But I think there'll be a mantle of musicians coming back, and I think some musicians will say, I'm just as happy staying at home and not performing live for folks. They can find me online. This is where my new home is. I'm working in the lab.
And I see that part of it. And I actually said the other day to somebody, one of the musicians, and he kind of chuckled and laughed. I said, if we do have to do a limited engagement, we have to do things that are on low end, we're going to have to limp along. And that's kind of where we're at. And I think that's an interesting perspective to have big donors do that. But we're going to have a place where there's going to have to be a start. We're going to have to get back to it one way or another.
Yeah, and it may be slower than anyone wants it to be. We were never, as much as I loved us, I always wanted our city to, our 18th and Vine to be as thriving as Bourbon Street is, with every venue playing music and good food everywhere. And I always wanted that, but there just hasn't been this citywide thirst for live performance, and maybe this will bring that back. That's my hope.
Well, I guess that's the key out of all of this, is that I think, just like you said, and I've heard this from every single musician I've talked to, the level of appreciation, the level of wanting this back, the level of kind of like post 9/11, where everybody had this deeper appreciation for being alive and for life. But I think there's something that's different about this. This is something that no other human on the planet's been through. I mean, there was, other pandemics, but no one remembers that. This isn't like post-war. This isn't post 9/11. This is very unique, and it's a world unifier. But what I'm hoping too out of all of this is that there's something about revenue sharing that gets figured out with musicians, because at the end of the day, we've talked so much about first-line people, front-line responders being the most important, essential people on the planet. And I get that. I understand
Absolutely.
that. Mm-hmm. But who's going to save the fiber of our souls that are inside right now? What is going to save us from losing our minds? I guess that's the question. What do you think that would be?
Well, it's scary, because with the number of art, Betty Wright just died yesterday, I believe. It seems like every day, when you find out one of these musicians has died, it's like hearing a library burn down. I don't know. There was so much dialogue before all this happened of, I don't leave the house for more than $75 a night. And I don't know if those artists are going to come back and play for anything less than that. Culturally speaking, are you going to have more artists who are developing solo musical things, playing with technology out in a venue? Will they be playing to pre-recorded tracks? Will they be playing unaccompanied? where usually they would have a band. They played the tapes. That evolutionary step makes sense to me. Already we were looking at the money changed the size of the band. All the soul bands dropped to smaller numbers, and all the neighborhood bands that had 10 guys in them, all stepping up to the mic for their individual song turned into 4 pieces, 3 pieces, and now it's just one guy with a guitar and a looper. So we were already seeing that economically of people just cutting the numbers down. The choice of art is going to change with every musician. And we haven't even talked about songwriters, folks who would sit at the piano and compose material for other people. They're still out there. I don't know what they're going to do. How do you introduce a new tune during this time? I don't know. Yeah. I feel like I've really strayed from your question.
No. Totally forgivable because we're in the middle of just utter confusion to begin with. But, so one thing you did touch on a little bit there during the first part of our conversation was kind of radio. And there was one musician at one point that said, now that we're in this situation, radio may take on a prevalence and an importance that it never had before. Right. And you had kind of talked a little bit about, you were going to tell me some stories about some larger format radio. Talk to me about your thoughts on radio right now.
So, I'm a little old school. I first started broadcasting when I was 16 years old back in 1988. So for me, radio is radio and internet radio is a different thing. I think this is a good time for internet radio. We all feel like we're a part of one community right now, and I think that's really going to be helpful for internet radio and sending music all over the place. For local radio, like KKFI, like KCUR, they're going to have a hard time. Luckily, some places have the benefit of getting a lot of grants or support from the university, and they're going to be able to keep going. Community radio is really at risk right now. They were at a risk before all of this was going to happen anyway. So I think this is a good time for internet radio, especially. But they don't seem to focus on community issues and rarely focus on local artists. They think more universally than what town they're based out of. My friends that are working at Comcast in the big places, one is a producer in a very successful morning show in a big market, and they fired 2 other producers because they just don't have enough money coming in. It's a big marketplace. So now they're having to produce 2 different shows using interns. Are we going to suffer a brain drain? Are we going to suffer with folks leaving? And part of that is just sloughing off. Part of that is just going to be whatever this new thing is going to be. But as long as local radio can survive, a town like us will appreciate it and celebrate it. But Comcast and the bigger ones will still work out of a centralized location, not help out your local neighborhood musician as much.
Yeah, I guess that's to me the scariest out of all of this is that you would think there's some protections with certain realms like Comcast and other big companies, but there just isn't. And
no.
Will they ever be able to hire those people back? And how will this change the landscape and richness of the content? Because, those people were serious people that had years and years. Mm-hmm. And what's going to happen? There's going to be so many people that are displaced, and you were even talking about people making art their nighttime hobby instead of their full-time thing, because I bet a lot of people that have freelanced in this town with work dried up until God knows when are scared, and they're thinking, I need a full-time gig. I need some security.
When we read a biography of a great musician, we know that they're coming back. We know that even though they had to toil in their father's shop or whatever, that they were going to come back and create music again. But for musicians in the middle of this, they don't have that security of knowing that they're going to be able to play music again. I would like to think there's going to be more crossover. In lean times, back in the Depression age, the musicians could always just get a gig at a church, and then they would give them a little money at the end of the day, at the end of the service. for playing, and now the church doesn't have as much activity either. I don't know where we're headed, but every institution is affected by this, and it makes us look back and see that the radio giant had wobbly legs to begin with. The church, which has supported musicians for a long time, hasn't really been doing that either.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there are exceptions.
Well, I guess that plays into the whole adage that we hear all the time, that you're only as strong as your weakest link.
Yeah. Yeah. True.
And with that in mind, I guess that's what happens when you get into a situation like this, is that you find out, who the strong ones are. I've thought through this whole thing, at the end of the day, no matter what happens, life is always so full of change. It's all life after all. I mean, this is extreme, but it also, too, I think the thing that reverberates throughout this is that if you were positive before this, it's going to mutate the positivity now. If you weren't, it's going to just be kind of the same gig. But
right. We need to be honest with ourselves that it's not ever going to be like it was. And those are the conversations that hurt me to hear. We were struggling, but we knew we would get by. We knew a timetable. I knew that if it's like, we really got to fill up this month, I could make some phone calls and make that happen. The vaccine is announced, and everybody had a vaccine within 48 hours from now. I don't know where I would put my first call. I don't know who's out there now. I just don't know. I have to reteach audiences how to be an audience again. And that's probably the most thrilling part. I think that's going to be wonderful.
Well, it's hopeful that you say that, that's been a big thing I've heard from musicians, is this cell phone thing and capturing it. And instead of it being something that's captured, it's dissipated into air and it goes into memory. And I think that's the one thing. I'm kind of in this romantic notion of what happened before around mid-March. And the last live jazz show I saw, and it was kind of prophetic and weird, I saw Bill Frisell at the Nelson with his trio.
Yeah.
And my wife, I've really been baptizing her in jazz, and when we were getting ready to go to this show, I was like, I don't know how to explain this to you, but Jeff Harshbarger was there, and he explained something like, he used these contrasting terms he painted, and like, there's something that's calming in the solitude of what he does, something like that. It was perfect.
Yeah.
And the show's going, and towards the end, Petra is singing. She stands up, has this robe, kind of like she's in church, and starts singing "We Shall Overcome." And everybody in the crowd, kind of in a trance, starts standing up, and everybody starts swaying. And they say, we shall overcome. And this was March 3rd. As if we knew there was something in the air that we were sniffing. And then, of course, with the idiosyncrasies of Bill Frisell, they go into Space Oddity by Bowie right after that.
That's
so
great.
It's like, yeah, but it was so refreshing. It was so poignant to hear that, to see that. And I think back, I look at that ticket stub, and I was like, that is an old world that I don't know that I will ever get back to. But I will tell you, as somebody that does this and covers this, there was never a show I didn't walk into and at least close my eyes for a minute and think, this is wondrous. I've always been very cognizant of the fact that when people are on stage, no matter how many people are there, they're up there, they're in a zone, they're doing it, and they're doing nothing but entertaining you and exhibiting and exuding the artistry that they have. And I've always appreciated that.
I mean, it's threatening, but it's exciting to think that there are people now who are taking up an instrument for the first time that have thought of something that nobody else will have thought of, and maybe they just play it to their walls. Maybe they don't. A friend of mine who's like an old time music guy is working on drums, just because there was just some laying around. And so I don't know. The internet's going to be a good teacher for a lot of young players, but nothing is going to match being in front of an audience and what that can bring you. You were talking about the uniqueness of a live performance, and in one of my other lives, I got to spend some time around Del Close. Have you heard of Del Close?
Yeah.
Yeah, from the Second City, and he he was rifling through my desk, and I don't know why, at the American Heartland Theater. He looked like a human raccoon. He was very intimidating, big, beautiful voice. But I did get to talk to him, and there was a lot of strange, I'm like, hey, Del, I can get you anything you want, the tab's on me, what would you? He's like, no, I stopped drinking March 5, 1982. Do you know when that was? I'm like, I remember it. I remember 1982. He goes, well, that's when Belushi died, and I found Wicca, and that made me stop drinking. Well, how do you respond to that statement? But, I just stand there slack-jawed. But one thing that he did tell me was sitting there in the theater with this grand man is that he said, what the perfect art form is fireworks. Because they can never be recaptured any other way. You can't tape them. You can't describe them. You can't film them. You can't draw them. Fireworks are their own art. And the most precious art is the thing that's just trapped in that moment. And there's no way to really keep it and capture it. And with the improvisational spirit of jazz, when you've got four minds there solving problems, working with a sound system that maybe is barely hanging on there in front of an audience that's digging it, and maybe some people who don't know what to expect. And it becomes this whole group mind of here's the song, here's the moment we're all sharing together. Gonna miss that till it gets back. Performing to your phone. Not to say there haven't been some moments of that, but it's nothing like walking in the room and feeling the air of another human being,
Yeah, and that's interesting. And I think the thing that I've learned, and I know it seems rhetorical, but it's gotten deeper and deeper with me the more I've gotten into jazz, is that it's truly a moment that will never be recreated. And I think same thing with a lot of blues shows and a lot of very unique shows where you're not trying to replicate and trying to do a Groundhog Day kind of Bill Murray thing.
Right.
That it's truly, it's made off of the fact that that's it. The one time you hear it, you'll never hear it the same again. And it mimics kind of what's going on right now. The realm of that art form is pure improv. Yeah. And right now, this world is total improv in a way that we
Well, an audience wants to know that you've risked for them. They want you to think that they were special enough that you did something different for them. You knew where things were going, but then something was just unique to this moment because they were there and you were there. For young performers, until they get in front of audiences, it'll be so exciting when they first start to experience that again.
And that's the thing, I think, too. What revelations do you hope that the audience gets from this time away? Like, what do you really hope sinks in? I mean, beyond, like, cell phone usage and things like that. But and we've danced around this and we've kind of hit it, but in a more pointed way. What do you hope we collectively realize so when we do return, it's really in the brain? It's floating.
I don't want to sound smug by just giving you one word, but empathy. I think our empathy has been at real risk for these last 20 years. And maybe this is the psychic boiling point that we needed. Maybe to see each other sick and encumbered by the new ways that we have to live. Maybe we can start having empathy for each other again. Music has been a great tool for that. All of art is a good tool for that. If empathy returns, and right now empathy is like your appendix. Nobody's quite really sure why it's there, but everybody's sure that it was there for one purpose at one time. It would be great to see that come back, and maybe this is how that happens.
That would be refreshing if that was the case. And I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Jason, thank you for taking some time out.
Just a light talk.
Yeah, right. Nothing heavy. Just talking about the weather, man. Thanks again, Jason. Take it
Hey,
easy.
Joe, be
Well.
safe. Thanks, buddy.
You got it.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Kansas City and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Jason for his class, time, and cool. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Let me come up for air.
Neon Jazz.